afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Mark Richardson's 2017 Planning Workshop for Home Improvement Businesses. My name is Michelle Letman. I am part of the marketing team here at Surefire Social, and I also have our Chief Marketing Officer, Shashi Belamkanda, and the Webinar Ninja, Steve Slack, with me today. Our speaker is Mark Richardson, an author, keynote speaker, advisor, and is highly regarded as a pioneer in developing standards of professionalism in the home improvement industry. If you missed part one of Mark Richardson's Business Fitness Checkup, we have an on-demand training where you can take the business fitness test, and I will put that into the chat box here shortly. We will also be answering questions during and after the webinar, so please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box. If you would like a copy of Mark's book, please send your name, mailing address, and your biggest marketing challenge to teamsocial@surefiresocial.com. Without further ado, here is Mark.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and terrific to be back with you all. Hopefully, in the last session that we did, you feel a little bit more fit by taking the fitness checkup. I encourage, if you haven't sort of gone through that process, I think it's a healthy thing, certainly for everyone to do, whether you feel like you're extremely fit or you have some challenges that you want to work on. By isolating, I think, some of those and then measuring sort of the level that you think you are, I think just like taking classes in school, you know which elements need a tutor and which ones that you should, continue to try to do well at. Today we're going to be looking at, I think, the business a little bit differently. We're going to be focusing on the future. We're going to be focusing on not only planning for 2017, but also positioning the business for the future. As you sit back and you sort of look at the stars and planets out there, a lot of them are pointing, I think, in very, very positive directions for the home improvement industry. We're seeing really good signs in terms of certainly the home appreciation. We're seeing some very positive things, I think, in terms of the interest rates. We're also, I think, seeing houses that were underwater certainly come out in a more positive way, and the level of pent-up desires on the part of the homeowners today, I think, are so much greater to be able to do those projects. At Harvard, in the Remodeling Future, Kermit Baker recently, on a Remodeling Thought Leaders discussion, sort of shared some of the numbers in terms of not only wrapping up 2016, but also looking at 2017. And in both cases, we're looking at a pretty strong finish for the balance of this year, and then that's going to continue into next year. Many, I think, of the Remodeling Thought Leaders felt the elections might have a pretty big impact in terms of potentially paralyzing some of the remodeling activity. However, it's really turned out to be certainly a very challenging election. However, the phone continues to ring, and the better remodeling companies, I think, continue to grow moving forward. So today, in this particular session, what I'm going to try to do is focus on this subject from really three different levels. Number one, I want you to start to have a broader view of how to think about positioning your business. How do you think about planning? And I'm going to take some different themes that we're going to talk about, some different ways to look at that, and be able to help you integrate it into your planning process. Secondly, I have an opportunity to spend a lot of time, I think, with the best of the best in the industry. So I'm going to share some of the keys that I'm seeing with their success. So if you have a broader view of how to think about your planning, you can integrate some of the keys to success, or at least take some inventory of how well positioned you are. I think then you can get into your planning process, where I'll wrap up with talking about some of the key pillars that you need to look at in terms of positioning and growing your business in the future. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what does positioning for the future really mean? And, having spent quite a bit of time, certainly in the remodeling industry and growing a pretty substantial business, what I found is that how you look at your business when it comes to growth, really does vary. Some businesses out there they look at growth in terms of the top line growth, the top line sales over the previous year. Other businesses, on the other hand, they look for a portfolio blend that maybe takes away, I think, some of the risk in terms of the high-risk projects. A good example of this is with those businesses as we got into the recession that dropped off pretty dramatically, especially the larger design-build businesses dropped off 30-40% from 2008, 2009. In large part, they dropped off so dramatically because they had sort of all their eggs in one basket. So as you're thinking about positioning to the future, it's important to have the right degree of competence and the right degree of focus, but you also need to think about your business, I think, as sort of like an investment portfolio that has a blend of stocks, bonds, cash, different elements, and try to get that portfolio blend in check. The third way I think to think about positioning, I think, is your team. And I'm going to touch on this throughout the course of today's webinar quite a bit. But you think about, are you really positioned for the future in terms of your team? I think oftentimes leaders within the remodeling business are visionaries and very focused in terms of growth, but sometimes the team is a little bit lagging behind. So as you think about how to grow and position, it may be more focused on developing and growing your team than necessarily just in terms of your top line sales. Certainly profitability, which is really a product of so many things within your business that you have to focus on. But if in fact you have, in coming into 2016, if you've positioned properly, maybe 2017 is all about really putting more on the bottom line. It's taken advantage of those investments that you've made this year. A fifth element might be also, as you position for the future, is the client experience. Your client today, I think there's a degree of transparency that's so important, I think, as you look at how you're positioned and making that client experience and those ratings in terms of client experience a priority, I think, is extremely important. Also, I think some businesses, they want to be more predictable and want to be more sustainable. You don't necessarily want a business that's a giant roller coaster where, when it's make hay times, you're up, and when it's a little bit more challenging times, you're down. The better businesses out there are really better at predicting what the future should be and making it more sustainable. So that might be your element in how you think about positioning for the future. Another element which I think is also important as you think about the future is your strategic alliances. Your alliances out there, I think, are really focused on growth as well. And it's way too difficult to be out on islands, I think, today with the proliferation of choices and materials and the complexity of businesses. So you might want to grow your circle to be much larger in terms of your strategic alliances as part of your growth strategy. But the bottom line is, I think what you need to do, not listening to Mark Richardson, but what you need to do is you need to define what that future means. What is positioning for the future yourself? I encourage you to get a circle of your leadership team or a circle of your key folks and have some good, deep discussions about this subject. So let's talk, again, keeping it a little bit at a 1,000-foot level. Let's talk about motivations. For many, many years, I thought the motivations of what everyone was pretty much the same in terms of growing a healthy business. Well, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been out there working with a lot of different businesses, really quality businesses, and one of the differences I see is the fundamental motivations of the owners within the business do in fact vary. And what I've at least identified is there's 7 motivations that I'm seeing in business owners out there. And most of you are a blend of these things, but quite frankly, the only way you're going to know how to position for the future is looking in the mirror and knowing what your motivation is, what the business's motivation is to be successful. So let me just spend a few minutes talking about some of those motivations. The first one is some, especially smaller businesses, they're just fortunate that they have a job. They may have gone into business because they lost a job. And now all of a sudden they can control their own destiny. So their motivations, quite frankly, are much more focused on their independence and their autonomy of having their own job and being able to control it. A second might be more of an entrepreneurial sort of spirit. I see this a lot with business owners in terms of motivation. They get excited about new opportunities, excited about innovation, excited about taking and growing things to the next level. That might be your motivation. A third one I see out there as well is you see the business as an investment. I have a good friend in Southern California who looks at his business as an investment. He even looks at, for example, his return on all the individual people within his business. In many ways, he sees it like a rental property that has a certain level of return that it's supposed to get. It's not necessarily just about the clients or just about the team, but it's very much about what level of return does this business really give me? And I'm not here to judge one person's motivation versus the other, but you have to know what yours is. A fourth motivation that I certainly hit a chord with, and I think it has to do with really healthy business, is you want to create a great business. And a great business has a lot of legs to it. It's focused on the product. It's focused on the process. It's focused on the people within the business. A great business is always looking at how to grow, not necessarily just because of additional profit in the owner's pocket, but growing the business creates opportunity for all. That's how you retain great people, is have business growth. Another motivation that I see out there with remodeling businesses is ego. There's a tremendous amount of ego. We see it certainly as part, and in large part it might be that's your motivation. You're more interested, for example, of being on the cover of the magazine or being highlighted with awards and those kind of things. But again, I'm not here to judge it one way or the other, but that is a motivation of some remodeling and home improvement businesses. The sixth one is more of an evangelist. And this, I think we all have a little bit of an evangelist gene in us, but that's where I think the business is more a cause that's bigger than necessarily the business, the product, the clients. It could be related to aging in place. It could be a cause related to, global warming or certainly energy-related issues that you just want to do the right thing. And if that's really your motivation, I think how you think about positioning yourself and growing moving forward, I think has to weave that in. And the last motivation is probably one of the more common motivations, certainly in the home improvement business, because we have a tremendous amount of family-oriented businesses, and there's a lot of focus on the legacy of what is, in fact, the future. So it's not necessarily just positioning it for today in terms of profitability or innovation or product, but it's also how are you positioning it for the next generation in your family that's going to carry it on for there. And as I said before, I'm not judging necessarily any one of these. Matter of fact, the majority of the folks out there are a blend of these. But what I am judging is if you don't know what your motivation is, you do not know how to properly position your business, properly position and come up with a plan for the future. So I encourage you to look at these 7 motivations and sort of almost think of it like a pie chart and ask yourself, what am I in terms of the blend of these things? I might be very focused on the business, but at the same time, I have sort of that evangelist sort of piece within it. That's very fine. That's cool. But you have to understand it if you're going to know how to plan for the future. As we talk about the business, Jim Collins said, culture eats strategy for lunch. And that was a sort of a fun little quote that I think really hit a chord for me years ago when I heard it. As I look at different businesses out there, you have to have a healthy culture if you're ever going to grow, I think, a healthy business. So by putting, I think, more emphasis on taking a snapshot of where your culture is now and really understanding and communicating what that culture is all about, I think that's going to be important in terms of position for the future. So, as I said earlier, I get a chance to spend, I think, a lot of really quality time with the best of the best out there. And one of the things I see in the top 10% is 3 common denominators, what I call the 3 ingredients for success. And these common denominators are like puzzle pieces. Each one has an important element in itself, but they all fit together to create, I think, a successful blend. So let me just highlight this for you, and then I'll unpack each one. Because I think if you can start to look at this in terms of how you're positioned, not only now in terms of your success, but also what you want to be able to work towards, I think you're going to be more successful. The first one is key to success is you got to have the right mindset in business. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute. The second is you have to be fundamentally fit. And as Michelle said, we did a webinar on that, and I encourage you to take a hard look at your fundamental business fitness. Because, we're out there today in business climbing the Rocky Mountains, not strolling through the Shenandoahs. It's really tough out there, and you can have the right mindset, but if you're not fit, you're not going to necessarily be successful. And the last element that we're going to spend some time talking about is change. Change. If you're not changing, change has got to be an integral part of your thinking. So all these 3 sort of fit together in an interesting sort of way if you're going to be successful. So let's unpack them for you. The first one, and Henry Ford, I love this quote from Henry Ford. He said, if you think you can or think you can't, you're right. It all starts with how you think about things. And if you believe it, then you're probably right. And if you don't believe it, you're right as well. You're not going to achieve the results. So it all starts with that. You have to have the right positive attitude in business. And that's really challenging today. If you flip on the evening news, it's not a lot of good news that you're hearing. For the most part, it's a lot of bad news. It's very hard, I think, to have a positive attitude, but I think as a leader in your business, that's got to be an integral part of what is key to be successful. I've seen businesses out there on the positive attitude vapors that they actually grow in the toughest of times. But, having the right mindset is not just about group hugs, high fives, and theme songs. Having the right attitude and mindset is also about synergistic thinking. It's about looking at sort of what you're doing in terms of your team and seeing sort of the classic 1 + 1 = 3. That's what's necessary, I think, to have a healthy and successful business. You also have to have the right work ethic. The right work ethic in business today, it's tough out there. I ask audiences all the time, let's stroll back to 2004, 2005. How much harder is it in business today than it was 10 years ago? And most people say it's quite a bit harder. It's 30, 40% harder. My follow-up question oftentimes is, well, are you working 30, 40% harder? And I'm not implying that you have to go home to your families and say, this guy just said I had to work a lot harder. What I am saying is part of the business mindset is having the right work ethic. It's tough out there, and the only way I think you're going to have the right mindset is with hard work. You also have to look at the pace and cadence of the business. Business and time is not on your side. You've got to move much quicker today than in the past, and I think that's also part of the right business mindset. The second element, as I said before, is you got to be in shape. So you can have the right mindset, but if you're not looking through sort of all the elements when it comes to the fitness in the business, chances are you're not going to be in shape. So in sort of the book I wrote about business fitness, what I realized was, you can have, for example, very good scores when it comes to your blood pressure, but if your cholesterol's a little bit off the charts, then you're probably going to need to be medicated. So you've got to watch all the different elements. It's knowing your numbers, having the processes, the leadership, the team, product, profitability, stress, reputation, positioning, and also your strategic relationships. And as we did in the book, and we talked about the last webinar, when you score yourself on all these different fronts, it really helps you to identify where the weakness, where the strengths are, and what you need to do to improve. The third element in terms of keys to success is change. Now, a friend of mine said years ago at an acceptance speech, if a business is not changing, it will become irrelevant. And that was a moment of truth, I think, for me. It really said to me, change is not an option. You have to integrate change into your thinking. Becoming irrelevant is like the ultimate insult. Insult certainly for you, for your clients, for your product, for your team. So you've got to constantly tweak and adjust and change if you're going to be successful. So as you think about these elements of change within the home improvement business, a good way to look at this is to compare to 10 years ago versus today. Thinking about your client, how have they changed? Thinking about your marketing strategies, how has it changed? Thinking about how you approach and land the planes in terms of your sales strategy. So just to break this apart for you, 10 years ago when homes were appreciating at double digit on an annual basis, your clients would say, just do it. You'd be there, and even in the time you were there visiting a client, there was some amount of appreciation in their home. Today, that client wants to discuss it. There's a lot more deliberation. You look at the sales cycles today, a very important metric. For many of the better businesses, they've extended out 20, 30% longer than they were 10 years ago. Well, why? Because the mentality of the client is to just discuss it, not just do it. 10 your clients were willing to take risks, where today they want to have more of a moderate level of risk when it comes to their decisions. 10 years ago, your clients would find you. If you were doing a good job, they would find you. Where today, you have to be more of a hunter and you have to go out and find them. And by leveraging different technologies to be able to find your clients today, that's how you're more successful. High-touch marketing always was the case. Personal referrals, high-touch, past clients, that was the way that most remodeling businesses were grown. And I certainly encourage continuing that process today. However, you have to also integrate today a lot of high-tech marketing approaches if you're going to be successful. In the past, your clients could follow the fantasy. Why? Because they're home appreciated. They just wanted to do it. Where today, it's your job to be the voice of reason and control the fantasy. Your job today is to be able to tell the client there are things you have to focus on in terms of not letting your house die, the things that you want to focus on that is all about your lifestyle. But then there's the long-term planning things. Have them focus on the things they have to do and they need to do now, not necessarily to do everything in one bite and be your fantasies. Otherwise, you'll lose projects. Today, you also, I think, or in the past, you could focus just on what kind of projects you're doing. Where today, you have to focus on how the client is buying. A futurist spoke about this at a conference a few years ago and showed it's not a linear process of how clients buy today. It's multi-dimensions. And if you can focus on how they buy and not just what they buy, you're going to be more successful. Today in business, and as you think about planning and success, I truly believe that 80% of it is a science and 20% is an art. Now, you can certainly argue in terms of those percentages, but the reason that I want you to think this way, especially on this webinar, is if 80% of business success is a science, you can do something about it. It's not a question of you were born to be successful. If it's a science, it's a formula, it's a process. And if you can focus on the formulas and the processes as you're moving forward, you're going to see a lot more success. So one question I oftentimes get is, why do businesses fail? And I've reflected on this, and I certainly want to give you sort of a little bit broader perspective, because the truth of the matter is that businesses fail for a lot of different reasons. In the home improvement businesses, 3 out of 5 fail in 5 years, but what's scarier is 9 out of 10 fail in 10 years. This is a business that is a very easy entry business, and the level of churning that goes on is really quite great. So putting aside the competency and putting aside the passion, 3 things that I see that oftentimes are the source or the reason that businesses fail. The first is focus. If you're not focused, laser focused on your business, then you will probably fail. This is like a child. This is like a business that needs a lot of care and feeding and focusing. And if you're not focused on it the right way, chances are you'll lose sight, problems, mistakes start to happen, and all of a sudden you'll be in trouble. It's sort of like the quicksand. It's going up your waist, gets up to your chest, and before you know it, it's going to bury you. The second is commitment. Now, oftentimes commitment changes based on the environment, changes based on the next shiny object that's interesting to you, but also in family businesses or partnerships, it's oftentimes they need to be aligned and committed together and continue to be successful. If one of your partners, for example, is pulling away in terms of their commitment on a particular initiative or division or a product or service, chances are it'll create a situation that potentially you'll be more challenged and fail. The third element that I see that businesses fail is capital. Capital is not necessarily just about money. Capital is also about having the right level of energy, corporate energy, time, and energy focused on the right things. You know, I'm not necessarily saying you need a giant war chest, but you cannot make your decisions in business today based on how much is in your checking account. You know, you've got to have some real capital if, in fact, you want to make the best business decisions. So another thing as you're thinking about positioning for the future that's quite important is what is the right pace of growth? You know, what's the right cadence? I think if you're an athlete, for example, a cyclist or a runner, you know if you want to sort of hit the stride in that running or in that cycling exercise, you've got to know what the right pace is to get the best times over the right period of time. Well, I think that is true in business. And in my book, Fit to Grow, I spent a whole chapter just focusing on the right pace of growth in a business. So let me just sort of summarize at least for what it's worth, I think, when it comes to this. And this, by the way, does change a bit because when we're during the recession, it was actually respectable to have a very modest level of growth. But now we're in more of the growth times in our industry and certainly with our clients. I think this is, in fact, the right rate of growth that you ought to be thinking about. So let's break it apart. The right cadence and the right growth. 0% growth, in my opinion, you're not moving. You've probably heard this before. If a business is not growing, it's dying. Well, I do believe that. You can define the growth in different ways, but not a 0% growth in business in today's environment. You're not moving, and that's not a healthy place to be. 0 to 5%, you may lose. It's certainly better than 0%, but you may lose some market share. You know, it's very easy, as I said before. You get a lot of other competitors getting into this, and if you're not gaining a little bit of market share, you're probably losing a little bit if at that modest level of growth. If you're at 5 to 10%, that's certainly a reasonable place to be, but honestly, it's not very impressive. You know, I was on a conference call with some of the best, and every single one of them were focused on double-digit growth in 2016 and 17. So while you might be doing high fives because you're doing 6, 7% growth, and there might be good reasons for that, I would say that's fine, but it's not necessarily something to be boasting about in terms of growth, in terms of the opportunities that are out there. In my opinion, the sweet spot of growth that is aggressive but realistic is in that range of 10 to 20% growth. Now, for those businesses that have been positioning themselves over the last couple of years coming out of the recession, that might be a little bit on the modest side for some, but 10 to 20% is what I would call aggressive but realistic. 10 to 20% is going to be something you're proud of. 10 to 20% is enough that you can continue to see a nice return in terms of the profitability. 10 to 20% is a way for you to retain good team members so they can grow with you as well. If you're going above 25%, which again, there's several businesses out there that can very much do that, but not all businesses can move at that higher rate. It's what I would consider a higher risk kind of level of growth. And again, just like with certainly other elements in athletics or in business or different kind of things. If you're really positioned for higher risk, fine, but at least understand and know that would be considered, in my opinion, higher risk. I've seen many, many businesses at 30, 40% growth from one year to the next actually not only crash and burn in terms of the business, but in some cases actually have to shut their doors. So you've got to be very, very careful when you get above 25% growth, I think, in terms of, is it the right level of aggressiveness when it comes to your business? So as you reflect on this, part of your positioning for the future is finding the right cadence that you're comfortable with. Finding the right cadence your team is comfortable with. And as I said, in my opinion, I think somewhere in that 10 to 20% is where the sweet spot is that you can continue to grow and see certainly positive returns. So I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, and she's going to highlight a couple of things for you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, this is the polls. If you guys want a local visibility checkup, this is a website analysis, and one of our awesome sales reps will walk you through some reports that they pulled on your business, which will highlight recommendations on how you can better improve your online presence, insights on how you currently appear to Google, and an in-depth evaluation of your website. By participating in this free analysis, you will receive 2 to 3 immediate recommendations that you can implement yourself so you can start taking the right steps towards converting more leads and being more effective with your overall digital presence. So we'll give you guys a few more seconds to answer, and then we'll get back. All right, back to Mark.
So, thank you, Michelle. So, in this next leg of the session here, I want to focus on some of the pillars within your business that you need to think about in terms of positioning for the future. And I think you can tell from not only the way I look at certainly business in the world, I like to break it in terms of parts. I like to think about business in many ways like you do about home remodeling and the structure itself. And one way to think about, I think, your business is to break it in terms of the parts like these pillars within your business. One of them I'm going to talk about and expand for you a little bit is your product. That's fundamentally, that's the stuff that you do. The second pillar I think that's key as you position for the future is your team. The third is your client. The fourth we're going to talk about is technology, and then the fifth is strategic alliances and partnerships. And I think just like if you look at this sort of like the overall fitness elements when it comes to your health of the business, you can look at this in terms of where do I want to put my spotlight in terms of positioning my business for the future. So let me unpack each one of these a little bit for you. The first one is your product. I think in the world that we're in right now, you have to make your product easy. It's got to be easy to do, easy to buy, and I think one of the things that oftentimes home improvement companies have done, they've made it way, way too complicated for your client. So as you go back and you review, for example, some of your clients' sort of surveys, what they're saying about you, your biggest competitor in business today is not other remodelers, it's the homeowner themselves. It's their levels of stress. It's their level of overwhelm with the proliferation of products and materials out there. So it's up to you to try to simplify and make that product as easy to buy as it can be. The second is, I think when it comes to your product, you ought to think in terms of some degree of diversification. Just like I was talking about before in terms of thinking about your business as a portfolio. Don't have all of your investment in high-risk stocks. It's not necessarily the smartest thing. In the go-go times that we experienced in 2004, 2005, it may have been great. But then all of a sudden you hit the recession. What happened? Well, if we hit some slowdown 24 or 36 months, are you going to be positioned properly? So you've got to look at the product and service, I think, to be a little bit more diversified. And the third, and I touched on this in terms of the level of change, is you got to focus on the how the client is buying your product, not just the what. You know, your client today wants to be assisted in buying the product, not necessarily be sold in your way of doing it. You might look at fixed price contracts, cost plus, time and materials. You might look at more creative ways to try to bundle and package the projects with feasibility studies and design agreements. You know, so focusing on the how the client is buying, mirroring their pace of how they're buying it to what you're doing, you're going to be more successful. As you think about the second one, we're going to be focused next on the team. A friend of mine, Charlie Chase, who actually is the CEO of the largest remodeling organization in the country, service remodeling organization in the country, about 5 years ago at a Harvard meeting, he said those businesses that will master the labor will be the winners. And what he was saying was master the talent that was making the people the top priority will in fact win. So mastering the labor, I think, has got to be a top priority when it comes to your team. How much time and energy are you spending on this? You know, one of the themes in my book is people are your greatest asset. And I'll ask audience all the time, you know, what's the most important word within this? And of course they're going to say people. And I said, truthfully, it's really the word asset. People are your most important, your greatest investment. And I think the more that you think about them in terms of investments, assets, and returns, you're going to treat the people with the degree of reverence that they certainly deserve. Today, I think when it comes to your people, you need to be more of a magnet than a net. You know, we're out there fishing in the ocean, and you're potentially folks out there, if you're out there with a little hook trying to catch people, you're never going to be very successful. You need to put some chum in the water. The best way to do that, I think, is in terms of your reputation. The best way to do that is in terms of your brand. You know, don't keep it a secret that you want top quality. And if you have that kind of approach in terms of business moving forward, you can, in fact, become more of a magnet for the talent out there and not a net. The best of the best remodeling companies out there do not necessarily have a problem finding the talent because they find them. So let's unpack this a little bit more. Let's talk about your team. The element with your team today, I think you have to have all A players. Now, in the home improvement business, we have a tendency, because we're very, high-touch kind of relationship type businesses, to think about our different people within the, oh, Jim's a good guy. Well, having good guys, if they're not A players, they don't belong on your team. The level of tolerance that clients have right now for B, C kind of level of quality of team members is not there. So you have two choices. You have to either upgrade them, or you have to, in terms of improving them, or you have to think about ways that you can replace them. The second is your team really committed to you. This is a time, I think, more than ever that it's an employment kind of opportunities that are out there. The only reason that people are quite frankly going to stay with you is if they're really committed to your cause, to your growth. Are you focused on that? When's the last time you asked some of your key team members, what would they like to be doing 3 years from now? I think the more that you can integrate your thinking and commitment to the future in terms of thinking about your team, the more successful you're going to be. And the last element is, and this may sound a little bit like a cliche, but it is something that's different than, I think, 10, 20 years ago in business, especially the home improvement business. 10 years ago, it could really ride on your back. You could be the force in terms of sales or force in terms of generating marketing. Where today, I think you have to have more of a team sport mentality. You got to deputize everyone in your team to help in terms of marketing, improving systems, improving your profitability. And I think the more you adopt a team sport mentality, the more successful you're going to be. The third pillar I want to touch on is your client. Your client today, I think, is a very, very important kind of element for you to look at. You got to know who your client is today. You got to know the demographics. Earlier this year with Professional Remodeler, I led a ProConnect tour in 6 of the major markets. And I asked them the question, these leading remodelers in the different areas, turn the clock back 10 years ago. What percentage of your clients were 30-somethings? Today, what percentage of your clients are 30-somethings? 10 years ago, consistently, in all 6 markets, they said 5 to 10% were 30-somethings, where today it's 30 to 35%. Now, that was just a gut check type of survey with these remodelers, but I think the point is you've got to know the demographics and data if you're going to make the right decision when it comes to your clients. You know, your clients are changing. You look at, there's a lot of buzz in terms of sort of the millennials coming through. Well, that is changing. The aging in place activity that's happening and what those priorities are for those baby boomers moving forward is changing. And the only way I think you're going to make the right decisions and have your ear properly to the ground is studying the data and demographics. The second is, I think you have to put a lot more time and energy on keeping the clients. You know, many of you think because you've done a project for a client, they're your client. However, those clients that are surveyed, in many cases, that was just a transaction that they did with you. They're not your client. You just did a project for it. You know, you have to have client retention strategies. For those better companies out there that are focused on retaining their client, getting project number 2, project number 3, they're not only reducing their marketing costs, but they're seeing much, much better returns in terms of delighted clients. And then lastly, I think you need to be investing in looking at the expenditures of your clients. You know, I think some of the better remodelers are out there, they're looking at their total home spend that the client is making. And the reality is, if you're in the kitchen and bath business, or you're in the design build, or you're in the specialty window business, you're just getting a fraction of their spend. And I think if you can adopt more a client for life mentality and say to yourself, what products and services do I need to put in place to get another 5 cents, another 10 cents of the dollar of their spend, you're going to be more successful, I think, moving forward. The fourth pillar, I think, when it comes to your business, I think, is technology. You know, many, many years ago, you know, I used to say technology will revolutionize this industry. Well, now I say it has revolutionized this industry. Technology has to be an integral part of your business and your thinking if you're going to be successful. So the first element, I would say, you got to start investing a lot of time and more money into it. Now, I'm not saying you go spend a lot of money on the newfangled sort of software or hardware out there just because it's out there. But you've got to make technology a priority within terms of how you're thinking about your time and your money and your investments in your business. The second element is you've got to think about, is your technology, are your different elements that you're doing with technologies benefiting the client? See, if you think about our industry, oftentimes we think about technologies benefiting us. It's a client relationship management system. It is an estimating system. It's accounting tools that make doing business. But at the end of the day, the more energy and you can focus to benefiting the client with your technology, I think moving forward you're going to be more successful. And then lastly, you've got to understand the degree of transparency. You know, today your clients know more about the products you put in their house than you do. And I know that's embarrassing to some, but that's just the way it is, in large part, obviously, because of technologies and the internet. They know more about the cost of things than you do. So what does that mean? You've got to think about how you bundle the costs moving forward if, in fact, you're going to be successful. But you know what's even scarier is they know more about you than you do. You know, with the level of reviews that are happening out there and how they connect to each other in an interesting way, you know, there's a tremendous amount of transparency. So when you think about technology, don't just think about it in terms of, you know, the different efficiencies that come out of it, but think about it in terms of how it's really changed the dynamic and the relationship that you have with clients moving forward. None of us are as smart as all of us. I love this little quote, and it really relates to the next, I think, pillar we're going to talk about, and that is strategic partnerships. You know, the reality is it's too scary to be out on islands by yourself. And I think the more that you think in terms of the future is tying into strategic partnerships, the more successful you're going to be. So let me unpack that for you. The first thing I want you to do is wipe out of your vocabulary the word vendor. Vendor's a transaction, and replace it with strategic alliance or strategic partnership. All of a sudden, you change the language and the culture of your company with these relationships. It'll change, I think, the way you look at each other, the way you discuss things, and the way you look at the future. It's all about how you grow the business together. It's all the way you share marketing energy. It's be that source for labor and opportunities for team members. But it all starts, I think, with changing the paradigm of how you're thinking about each other. The second is, I think it's important you to think with the different remodeling community out there, think of each other more as allies than competitors. Now, I'm a huge advocate of certainly the associations with NARI and NHB and the Kitchen and Bath Association. And one of the cool things about it, when I go and speak to these different groups, they clearly are sharing the best practices, and it's really better for everyone. The reality is you have a very, very small percentage of the market share in terms of home improvement dollars, and you're not really competing that much with different remodeling community. And if you all of a sudden can start to have more of a bond with that community, I think you're going to be successful. The other benefit of strategic partnerships moving forward is the education and contractor programs. Strategic alliance, the manufacturers out there, they are your new university. They are sort of your associations and your contractor, your credentials. That's where it's coming from, is these partnerships, not necessarily the traditional education community. So I think the more that you can look at strategic partnerships as an integral part of how you position for the future, the more successful you're going to be. So I want to wrap up, I think, with this next couple of slides. And as I look and I get a chance to really hang out with the best of the best, the great companies begin with great leadership. I don't know many companies out there that are great without great leadership. And I actually talked to many of the team members within that, and there's a degree of trust, there's a degree of reverence when it comes to the leaders within that company. So as you think about how can you become a better leader, because quite frankly, you'll never position for the future if you don't put the time and energy in becoming a better leader yourself. So it all begins with your mindset. Do you have the right mindset? Is it really positive? Are you setting the example in terms of work ethic? Are you setting sort of the standard in terms of the cadence and pace? It all starts with your mindset, because your people want to follow and be inspired and motivated, and not necessarily woe is me, and not necessarily not seeing you in a positive way. The second is, are you a student of success? As I look at the best of the best and I get a chance to hang out with the best leaders out there today, one of the common denominators is they are students of success. They realize that success is not necessarily a gift. They're actually students. So what does that mean? They're investing in themselves as much as they're investing in the business to continue to see that grow. And lastly, I think if you want to be a strong leader, you have got to balance the short, medium, and long-term focus. Your leadership cannot be focused just on today. And that's not easy, because today needs a lot of attention. So you've got to look at the blend of your time. What percentage of your time is focused on 3 months, 1 year, 2 years out? And if you're not spending, I think as a leader in your company, at least 10 or 20% of your energy looking out to the future, I think you're going to have some challenges. So as I said before, we can talk all day long about all the different elements of how to position, but probably the most important one for it to happen, it's like the key to opening up the door to this, it's all going to start with you. So I want to summarize with you some of the things we've touched on, and I think certainly Michelle and the group here wants to really open it up and allow you to ask a question or two. Number one, now is the time to invest in growth. Now is the time to make hay. Do not sit back and ride the brake while you're trying to ride the gas pedal. That's not the way you drive a car. That's not the way you drive a business. Don't jam down the gas pedal and be reckless. But now is the time to invest in growth. The second is, don't forget about your alliances. Start to deputize your alliances, your subcontractors, your material suppliers, your manufacturers as you're thinking about the future. Third element is your people. People are your greatest asset. Are you treating that carpenter's helper with the same reverence that you are the new van or the table saw? If you're not, you're probably not getting, I think, the meaning of what this theme is all about. 80% of this is a science. And what that is giving yourself the license to follow the formula, the license to improve. Be a student of success. Start making appointments to yourself to focus on your own improvement if you want to be positioned for the future. Intentions without actions equals squat. So I've given you, I think, today sort of a collage of a whole bunch of different ways to think about this subject. And, as Ken Blanchard said, if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't really mean anything. So try to pick 1, 2, 3 nuggets of what you've heard today and put them into action tomorrow. And if you do that and put a few more into the next week and a few more the week after, I think you're going to see a lot more success. So again, as you've certainly heard this adage, seize the day. Now is the time. Now is the time to act. And I really believe that we're very fortunate in the home improvement business. I think fortunate in terms of the opportunities that are out there. I think it's safe to say that homeowners are not going to all of a sudden say, I don't need home improvement experts. I'm going to live in a cave rather than a home. It's really important, I think, that you realize that now's the time to get out and make it happen and really act. So I want to thank everybody. And again, I'll open it up for questions that we might have over the next few minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. That was fantastic. So we have a few questions here. John wants to know, how much should I budget for marketing in 2017?
Great question. So how much should you budget for marketing in 2017? Well, the answer is it depends, okay? And I don't want to sort of be too vague about it, but many of the specialty businesses out there that are specializing in window replacement or bath kind of projects or roofing, those kind of things, they have to invest a lot more in marketing than the design build firms. What I would do is I would say back into this subject, what is the profitability I would like to see? What's the gross profit to generate the profitability? What are the sales required? To get the sales, what do I need in terms of the number of leads based on the close rate? And then say to yourself, what's my marketing plan to be able to do that? The amount of spend that you put into your business in terms of marketing is going to vary pretty widely. And I'm going to give you some parameters because, quite frankly, you don't need just a lot of rhetoric. Most of I think your smaller or medium-sized design build firms are going to invest, I would say, or full-service remodelers, somewhere between 2 and 5% in terms of their marketing efforts. Most of your specialty kinds of businesses are going to be somewhere between 10 and 20%. So if you look at your overall gross sales and back into it, those are some rough parameters. But the bottom line is you need to spend what you need to spend. And I certainly wouldn't encourage you to spend more than what you needed to be successful.
Okay, Richard wants to know, if you could pick one thing to focus on, what would it be?
It's sort of like asking a parent who their son or daughter came with their grade card, what subject should I get the tutor on? I think you have to take the inventory, as we talked about before, and I would focus on my low scores. What I find in businesses today, probably one of the lower scores that's very easy to improve upon is knowing your numbers. Not knowing your numbers is sort of like flying blind. Not knowing your numbers. Imagine you're driving a car and you don't even have the speedometer working or the gas gauge. It doesn't make for good decisions. you'll either run out of gas or you'll get a ticket because you don't know the speed that you're going. So I would encourage spending a little bit of time really diving into the metrics. It's almost like getting sort of blood tests, so to speak, because it'll tell you what you need to focus on in your business.
Okay, I think we have one time for one more question. Shirley wants to know, how do you get labor/workers for our industry? They have a landscaping business and have a hard time getting workers.
You know, again, I've sat on a couple panels. It's been a focus of Harvard in terms of sort of the whole dynamic. And, of course, even in the political scene right now, it's a bit of a challenge when you know, some are thinking that, you need to shut down the immigration. So, I think that when it comes to workers in your business, they're out there. In many ways, I think you have to become, as I said before, you have to be the brand. You have to be the magnet. You got to focus on the right culture, short, medium, and long term. I think fundamentally, good, great people want opportunities. So you need to do that. So what does that mean? I would tap my alliances on the shoulder. If you're in the landscape business, why not go into your nursery or your suppliers? You're spending a lot of money with them. Why not ask them? I need the names of three top landscape workers to be able to interview or bring into my business. If you're involved in rental tools or something that you use, I'm going to tap them on the shoulder as well. I'm also going to tap my business relationships. So I'm going to seek out friends to be able to give me names of people that want to work for good quality companies.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to all who attended today. We will be sending the webinar recording within the next 24 hours, but we hope you guys all got some great information out of this, and have a great afternoon.